I'm absolutely honoured and humbled to be here. And I have to say, particularly moved to be a part of this evening. Having the opportunity to, again, experience Nova exhibit, but in an evolved, in an expanded, and in some respects a reimagined form, has been truly, truly moving. To hear testimony from On and the incredibly moving words, Idit, Shamir, that you shared this evening, it brings everything once more to life and to the fore. And Sydney, what an inspiration you are. I know that you mentioned your own family connection, and I know that we are all so glad that Romy has returned. But what your words indicated to me, or reminded me of, was the family connection that I think I felt, and I'm sure everyone here felt, with every single one of those hostages and those victims of Nova and across the south of Israel on the 7th of October. It brought the Jewish community around the world together. It unified us as one family. We may be the smallest people in the world, but we are the biggest family, and that was never more powerfully felt than on that tragic day and the 19 months thereafter. So thank you, all of you, for reminding us of that in your own particular ways, and it reinforces for me that each and every one of us have our own role here. Our own role to bear witness, to push back against the falsehoods, to advocate, to stand up, to be strong, and to set an example for the rest of the Jewish community to follow in those footsteps, and to inspire our allies from other communities to speak up for the truth and for justice, and of course, in terms of my favourite subject, the proper application of international law. But I'm thrilled that on an evening like this, we can bring all of those strands together and hopefully collectively learn from each other and take strength and confidence from the fact that we are not alone in this fight.
Just on that note, you had an incredibly storied legal career. You were a Pegasus scholar at the Columbia Law School. You clerked for the president of the Supreme Court of Israel. It's an astonishing resume, but it's also a very relevant resume, I think, because of your time at Columbia, right? Columbia has become the front line of anti-Semitic hatred, of violent rhetoric. You were there in 2018, I believe. Could you have seen this coming at the time? Was Columbia showing signs of what was to come? And what do you think we can and should be looking out for on our other campuses that have reached not quite yet the peak that we've seen in Columbia?
So my experience, in 2018, I was a fellow at Columbia Law School, so I spent quite a bit of time in the faculty lounge. And I think one of my major takeaways was that the hostility I encountered was not just bottom up. This was not just coming from the students. This was top down. This was coming from members of the faculty, especially in the international legal arena. The International Legal Academy was captured a long time ago. If you have not drunk the Kool-Aid on Israel, you are not going to progress as an academic. You are not going to get assistant professorships. You're not going to get tenure. So that in and of itself was pretty palpable. But what I have to say, in looking at where Columbia and of course other universities across North America and across the world have shifted to, I'd say I wasn't surprised by the sentiment, but I began to deconstruct some of the reasons why we had seen this bizarre state of affairs where students who have grown up in Western liberal democracies with all of the privileges of living in this part of the world, the freedoms, decided to ally themselves with terrorist organizations and fly the flags of Hamas and Hezbollah. And it struck me that ultimately it came down to an absence of purpose, and that this presented them with an opportunity to camp out and to feel as though they were part of something. Yes, it had absolutely been built upon and predicated on all of the lies that they had been taught, to be ashamed of the culture from which they had come, to be ashamed of the traditions of Canada, America, the United Kingdom, European states, of the benefits that they had been born with. and to project those imagined ills onto the Jewish state. And it struck me that that absence of purpose, frankly, was on us as the slightly older generations. Because when I started this journey of mine about 25 years ago, it's when I found my purpose. I was 11, and I ended up at a great high school that was extremely anti-Israel. It was part of the intellectual liberal elite. And I found my purpose to start with in arguing with my teachers and pushing back on the false notions that they were peddling in the classroom. Because I knew better. I'd been to Israel. I'd read the news. I'd experienced so much of what they were talking about from afar. And I'm extremely grateful and privileged to have had that purpose for the last 25 years. And that's what I see students at Stand With Us have enjoyed also. I was extremely privileged to speak at the conference in Los Angeles, 650 students from around the world. And not all of them came from environments where there was a strong Jewish community. Many of them were at their universities fighting this fight, feeling like they were the only ones, the only Zionists around. To see their faces, to see the transformation in them when they came together with like-minded students from around the world and realized that they were not alone, that was extremely powerful. And it resonated for me because it echoed my own experience. I very much grew up thinking that there were 3 other Zionists in the whole of the UK, my parents and my sister. I was delighted when I came to the university and I realized I was mistaken. But that realization for me was extremely powerful. That sense of purpose for me was extremely powerful. That is what I see Stand With Us giving these students. That is what I see is lacking in these students who have been hijacked and hoodwinked and brainwashed to support terror and a fight against the West. But we have a platform and a pathway through this, I think, through the incredible work that Stand With Us and other organizations like it are doing.
Here in Canada for a second, talk about how difficult it's been for us. The latest blow, I think, for the Jewish community here was Israel issuing a travel warning to Canada.
Just before I came.
We've got lots of security around, and unfortunately that's become our reality, right? The reality has become that we can't release the locations of our events until 2 days before. We have to have more security than we've ever had in our lives. All of our synagogues are renovating their buildings to increase their security protocols. What do you need from us? What can Canadians be doing right now to lobby our government to deal with the fact that the CBC puts out memos to say don't call Hamas terrorists, call them freedom fighters or militants? What does the average person in this room need to do?
So in many respects, Canada is at the front lines of some of the emerging battles here. In my not frequent trips to Toronto now, I've learned about this invention of anti-Palestinian racism. This is about to be exported outside of Canada, mark my words. So it's up to you to defeat it here, because it is an absolutely atrocious attempt to silence truth and to promote revisionist history. I'm sitting in front of you as the granddaughter of Palestinians. My grandparents, living in the British Mandate, had identity cards issued to them that said race, Jewish, nationality, Palestinian. The concept of exclusively Arab Palestinian national identity was invented by Yasser Arafat in the 1960s. And what anti-Palestinian racism is trying to do is to silence me and my history. What do they call it? My lived experience, or that of my grandparents. And it's trying to silence the truth, the facts, the fact that there never was a state of Palestine. There never was a Palestinian territory. The British Mandate was not a state, but was in fact the launchpad for the Jewish Yishuv to build the state institutions that ultimately enabled it to declare independence. So if there was one thing I can ask you, it is to devote your energies to many of the issues that we've discussed today, but to include fighting back against this appalling attack on freedom of speech and freedom of expression. because undoubtedly what starts in Canada is not going to end in Canada, and that is the blueprint that will be rolled out in other places. So something that is unique to Canada and specific to Canada at this time would very much be this new invention and this assault on the truth and the reality. And what I would just highlight in relation to this is a concept that I've come across a little more recently, which was addressed in a short paper by the Louis Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under International Law, also doing wonderful work on campuses in the United States in particular, that discussed erasive anti-Semitism. This is the erasure of Judaism as a race, as a people, as a nation. The projection that Jews can only be a religion, so that the connection of the Jewish people with the land is erased, which is integral to this canon of colonialism, right? It erases the indigenous nature of the Jewish people in Judea, and it is, frankly, I believe, an assault on the Jewish people being able to self-identify in the way that, especially Canada, wishes to allow people to do. So I see those two concepts in a way sort of mirroring each other and being somewhat linked. But I think that this is very much the heart of where this new initiative is coming from, and I would really encourage you to do your utmost to counter it.
You talked about this as a fight you've been having for 25 years. The fight is, we only go as far as people will listen, right? When we had the encampment set up here, there was a real tendency where if anyone from our side of the conversation tried to approach in a friendly way, non-confrontational, there would be a wall built to prevent the people who you were talking to from continuing that conversation. I'm sure that the vast majority of people here saw what happened to you last week on Piers Morgan and the absolute, as you called it, circus that took place. I want to read a quote quickly. You said that you thought in your brilliant piece for The Spectator, which I suggest you read if you haven't yet, you called it a refusal, perhaps even a fear, to hear the reality, the facts, and the law when it comes to the war against Hamas. Our students feel this every day. Can you expand a little bit on what you meant when you said that and how you feel like that presents itself in our world today?
Well, in that particular context, not allowing me to answer the barrage of questions that were coming my way, it did strike me as, that, of course, it's part of a particular style and approach, which I do consider to have become a circus, but it was indicative to me of something deeper because it wasn't the first time. And ultimately, whenever I have been interviewed on BBC, Sky, and others, there is almost a meltdown at what it is that I'm saying, because it is so at odds with the agenda that these media institutions are peddling. And to me, first of all, it means it's ever so much more important that I stick to this and keep expressing the realities of the situation, the proper application of law, and talk about my own experiences. I mean, I echo again, I have been extremely privileged with the opportunities that I have had, especially over the last 19 months. I went into Gaza in September last year with a military expert panel, generals, colonels, majors from 6 NATO countries. And we went into Rafah along the Philadelphia corridor. We saw some of the challenges that the IDF was experiencing. The tunnels under the border with Gaza, which are extraordinary. Some of them were big enough for 2 lanes of traffic, right under Egyptian command towers. So having these insights is so important, I feel, to be speaking up and to be challenging it, but armed with these facts, what I'm saying is so contrary to not just the received wisdom, but all of the media coverage, certainly over the last 19 months, but extending many, many years before that, which is just regurgitating Hamas propaganda. Nothing that is reported out of the Gaza Strip is reported without the control and the stamp of approval of Hamas. And frankly, the international media are complicit in parroting this Hamas propaganda and in snuffing out the realities of the situation. And so when I bring them out, there's a general kind of system error and an inability to be able to properly confront and deal with them. Because frankly, and this is the comfort and the optimism that I do take out of this, I do believe that the truth will out. I do believe that the facts ultimately will be vindicated. it's just a long process, and I'm extremely grateful for the support from all of you and many others around the world to continue to do so. I hope that I can inspire others to pick up that pattern, to use this ammunition, to study the facts, and to collectively push back. Because I think when these anchors, media presenters, journalists hear the truth from multiple quarters, that system error may even evolve into an acknowledgement of the harm that they have done, certainly over the last 19 months, in providing succor to Hamas, in supporting these terrorists with their genocidal agenda, in dragging out this conflict, perpetuating, prolonging the conflict, costing lives on the Palestinian and Israeli side. This is what the international media are responsible for. It has led to unbelievably damaging statements from the UK, Canada and France most recently, statements that provide succor to Hamas and that unfortunately elongate the conflict. Ultimately, it's all arising from the very point that you picked up on in your question, the refusal to even engage with the reality and the facts.
Mainstream media, right? We have the same issue we're facing on social media every day. These social media companies, platforms, Facebook, Meta, whatever they call themselves now, have no issue with their community guidelines as it relates to commentary against the Jewish community, against Israel. Having said that, we don't see nearly the same amount of content on TikTok, for example, that is pro-Israel versus pro-Palestinian. But the biggest thing right now is we're seeing AI, we're seeing deep fakes, we're seeing videos that don't exist of soldiers talking about how much they love killing children. There's a lot going on right now. You're talking about it in the mainstream media and everywhere else that I just mentioned. We also talked earlier about the fact that even in our courts, we're not seeing judges looking at the facts as they should be, evaluating them. So where do you see the battle for truth playing out as we try to reclaim our narrative, as we try to prevent history from being rewritten in front of our eyes? Where do you see that playing out, and how do people like you, people like us, make our voices heard in that battle?
So social media is as a whole nother battlefield, and of course the numbers are very much against us. I've always been a big believer in quality over quantity though. And I know, I see a lot of quality out there in this room this evening. And I know that a lot of you are already doing an awful lot of important work on Twitter, on Instagram, and Stand With Us is doing a remarkable job on that front too. What I would say, and perhaps coming back to the laws of armed conflict in this context, the realities of what international law says, especially international humanitarian law, the laws of war, are recognized by experts. You've got military experts like John Spencer, like Colonel Richard Kemp. You've got some legal experts that are speaking out. You have the expert military panel that I went into Gaza with, who came back and did start writing op-eds about their experiences. They had never seen rules of engagement like this. The level of commitment of Israel to prevent civilian casualties in the Gaza Strip is simply unparalleled. You have Colonel Richard Kemp, who's repeatedly given evidence, including the United Nations on this point, calls the IDF the most moral army in the history of warfare. I mean, why is that? Because no other army takes the measures that Israel takes in upholding the principles of international humanitarian law: necessity, distinction, proportionality, and precaution. But the fact that you have experts that are willing to speak up on this basis, and not just call out the misinformation, but also call out the danger that this misinformation is driving by saying, if you are misrepresenting what Israel is doing in Gaza, you, Canada, are going to struggle the next time you're facing genocidal terrorists on the battlefield. The same with the US, the same with the UK. If you start morphing the acceptable framework of how to conduct warfare morally and legally, it's going to have a much broader, wider impact on the ability of Western civilization as a whole to defend itself. And I think that the fact that you have experts
like these individuals I mentioned, that are willing to speak out on it, speaks volumes. I think that provides a great deal of ammunition to many people to be able to turn the tide. You've raised, international courts and tribunals, which frankly is a dire situation where we're seeing the politicization of courts like the ICC, like the ICJ, but let's not forget the brave voices that are speaking out against this, including the Vice President of the International Court of Justice, Julia Sebutunde, the UKLFI judge, every single one of her dissenting opinions and her dissent to the preliminary orders of the ICJ in the South Africa case. They have called the court out consistently for its misapplication of international law, for its appalling approach to fact-finding, for its politicization of these issues. And I think as long as we have individuals with very strong voices speaking out across all of these issues, then there is hope, and there is leadership and something for the rest of us to be able to follow.